the House of Representatives. Trump indicated that he had a mandate, and I wanted to let him know that he didn't have a mandate to end or to gut or to eviscerate or to cut Social Security as well as Medicaid. But my focus was on Medicaid. And I said to him, you don't have a mandate to cut Medicaid. Medicaid is needed by people who are not of means. We now live in a government that is of the plutocrats, by the plutocrats, for the plutocrats. They have Medicaid. They have doctors. We have to stand for people who are not as fortunate as others. I have good health care. I want my constituents to have the same health care I have. Many won't have it, but I'm going to protect what they do have.
Now, President Trump has said he is not going after Social Security, yet they are firing thousands of Social Security Administration workers. On the issue of Medicaid, you are not alone in representing so many people who are on Medicaid. In fact, many MAGA Republican Congress members are in exactly the same situation. Are you seeing behind the scenes that they're deeply concerned about these massive cuts to pay for massive tax cuts for the richest Americans?
I have not seen a scintilla of evidence indicating that there is any consternation with reference to the cuts. The state of Texas, Ms. Goodman, was offered $100 billion to aid people who were sick and without means, to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. Texas turned down $100 billion to aid the poor because Texas would eventually have to pay 10%. The government would pay 90%. I assure you, I'm concerned, but many of my colleagues are not. We have to fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves.
Let me ask you, I think it was 10 Democratic Congress members joined with the Republicans in censuring you yesterday. I'm wondering, as someone who has survived segregation yourself, in a few years you'll be 80, you've survived Jim Crow, where decorum was seen as a way to dampen protest. What message do you have for all of those who censured you and said you broke the decorum of the legislature?
Well, there's so much to be said about what you've just called to my attention. Let me start with this. The President of the United States of America, at that joint session, pointed over to Democrats and called them lunatics. That was a breach of decorum. The president uses his incivility to take advantage of our civility. I refuse to allow him to do this. The president has to understand that he has to demonstrate some degree of civility and respect decorum himself, but he does not. Now, with reference to my colleagues, I told them I was going to vote present, so as not to pressure anyone to vote in any particular way, because I voted my conscience. I did what conscience called upon me to do, and my convictions demanded that I do when I spoke to the president. I would do it again. I regret that I've been censured. There is talk now of removing me from my committee with the Honorable Maxine Waters, Financial Services Committee. My guess is this is not over, but I will stand on what I have done. I'm not ashamed of what I have done. And when you mentioned John Lewis at the genesis of this interview, it caused tears to well in my eyes. I knew him. I know his story. He told me that he thought he was going to die on that bridge. And he told me about peaceful protest. And the one thing that stands out in my mind is when you do it, be prepared to suffer the consequences. Dr. King went to the Birmingham jail because he was prepared to suffer the consequences. I'm prepared to suffer the consequences. I don't say I agree, but I will suffer whatever the consequences are because I represent people who cannot represent themselves.
So just to reiterate what you're talking about, today is the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday,
Yes.
March 7th, 1965, when John Lewis, your colleague in Congress, before that civil rights leader, led hundreds of voting rights activists from Selma trying to go to Montgomery. They were walking over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they were beaten down by Alabama state troopers. John Lewis having his skull fractured. It would be a turning point in the civil rights movement. 5 months later, President Johnson would sign the Voting Rights Act into law. Congressmember Green, do you think this is a Bloody Sunday moment right now? The low point before a high point?
I hope that we have reached the depths of this, but I'm not sure, given the behavior of this president. This president doesn't seem to understand that there are people who don't live in the same level of life that he lives in. He lives in the suites. There are some people who live in the streets, and we have to concern ourselves with them as well. And with reference to that march, may I just share this piece of information? Frank M. Johnson was a federal judge who issued the order to part the way, to cause those officers to leave the Edmund Pettus Bridge and to allow them to march on. I mention him because his place in history has not been acknowledged. He was a white Southerner who was a George Wallace contemporary, but he had the guts. He had the guts and the courage to take a stand that caused him to have security 24 hours a day. They bombed his mom's home. We have to have that kind of courage now. We've got to take a stand against what this president is doing with his incivility. We're going to have to demonstrate. We're going to have to protest. I don't want us to have to harken back to the 60s, but we are being treated as though we are in the 60s. We have to do more than simply say that we want legislation. We've got to demonstrate, and we've got to protest and be prepared to suffer the consequences.
Congressmember Green, in 2017, you became the first Congressmember to call for President Trump's impeachment from the floor of the House of Representatives. You're doing this again?
I am, and I am currently nearing the end of the first draft. I believe that he has done things that would merit impeachment. For edification purposes, if we wanted to impeach a president for speaking ill of Congress, as the president did, we can do it. How do I know? Because in 1868, Andrew Johnson was impeached for speaking ill of the House of Representatives. Impeachment is not all that the scholars would have us believe it is. It is what Gerald Ford said when he was in the House. Whatever a given Congress concludes that it is on a given time, at a given time, when you can get 218 members, assuming that you have a full complement of members voting, to vote for it, then that's impeachment. It really is that simple. It's been done to presidents before, and of course we know about Clinton and we know about others, but the point is we have to make is impeachment is a remedy for a runaway president who believes that there are no guardrails, who believes that the Supreme Court has placed him above the law, and who is now very close to a point where he will not honor court orders. When he does that, Ms. Goodman, he at that point will become a dictator. We are this close. When he goes over that line, that second, that scintilla of a second, he will become a dictator, and we will be under a dictatorship. I refuse to wait until that happens before I act. So I will act in defense of the Constitution and for the people of this country.
Congressmember Green, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to talk about your friend, the former Houston mayor and recent Congressmember Sylvester Turner, who died Wednesday at the age of 70 after he had attended President Trump's speech the night before. I want to play Sylvester Turner's last public message addressing the potential cuts to Medicaid.
This is Angela Hernandez, my guest tonight for the State of the Union. Angela is here to advocate on the importance of Medicaid.
I'm Angela. I'm from Houston, District 18. My daughter is Daisy Garcia. She's 2 years old. She has a rare genetic disorder, chromosome 8p, inversion, duplication, deletion. Causes a lot of developmental and medical challenges. So losing Medicaid would be devastating to us.
So please let people know, don't mess with Medicaid.
That is Sylvester Turner, newly minted Congress member, longtime Houston mayor's last message before he died on Wednesday. Your final thoughts, Congressman Green.
25 years he served in the State House, 8 years as mayor of the city of Houston. He was a public servant par excellence. He cared about people, and he made a difference in the lives of people. I will miss him. When Bishop Dixon called me and told me that he had transpired, I fell to my knees and I cried, literally, not an exaggeration, because he had just been with me on the floor of the House, and I couldn't believe that this could happen. Mr. Speaker, and still I rise. And still I rise, a proud, liberated Democrat, unbought, unbossed, and unafraid. And I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to call to the attention of the House, this place that I revere, and notwithstanding recent events that I have great respect for. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in response to a censure that took place as it relates to my behavior. I have been told by some that they did not have an opportunity to hear the actual resolution as it was read. I have here HRES 189, the censure resolution as it relates to my behavior. I believe this resolution should be read. I am not in any way upset with the Speaker. I want people to know that the Speaker did what he was supposed to do. He did what he was supposed to do when we had the joint session of Congress. When I interrupted, the Speaker called it to my attention. He did it on multiple occasions. I have no reason in my heart to be upset with the Speaker. Later, persons came over and escorted me out. I appreciate them. They were very kind to me, the officers, very kind. They said kind words to me. And as a result of my behavior, I have been censured. I'm going to read the resolution and give some commentary. It reads, HRES 189, in the House of Representatives, Mr. Newhouse submitted the following resolution, which was referred to the committee on, and the copy that I have does not have a committee. I'm not sure it was referred to a committee. It may have come straight to the floor. But regardless as to how it arrived, it did. And I'm not contesting the procedure. The resolution reads, censuring Representative Al Green of Texas. Whereas on March 4, 2025, during the joint session of Congress, convened pursuant to House Concurrent Resolution 11, the President of the United States, speaking at the invitation, I am going to fight the cutting of Medicaid. I hope that this comment, this message that I'm giving today will deter them and cause them to go a different way. Then they can say, we were never going to do it. Al Green just had this false notion. Well, let me have it. Don't cut Medicaid. It's all they have. This is the richest country in the world. Mr. Musk has doctors. he will get the best health care. Let him understand that he should be on my side. He should be on the side of the people who need this health care. He has the ear of the president. Mr. Musk, speak to him. He listens to you. But for the grace of God, dear brother, you could be on Medicaid. You've just been blessed. Don't assume that it was your intellect that has caused you all of these great blessings that you've received. You've just been blessed beyond measure. Speak to the president and tell him that Medicaid ought not be cut. But I continue. I interrupted. I was said to be in need of sanctions. I came to the floor today, and while the speaker was reading, I recalled what happened in the 60s. I recalled when we were faced with adverse circumstances. We would sing a song that would inspire and encourage us to move forward with alacrity.
Hey, listen up. Are you...
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. That was an act of incivility. Why, Al Green, would you come to the well before your colleagues in the world and commit an act of incivility? Here is why. Because when the President of the United States, right there at that podium, addressed the members of Congress, Democrats seated on this side, seated, many of them saying nothing. The President of the United States looked upon them, pointed toward them, and said, I quote, and said, lunatics. The President of the United States at a joint session of Congress called members of Congress lunatics. That was an act of incivility. Incivility. There comes a time when you cannot allow the president's incivility to take advantage of our civility. And that's what's happening in this country. His incivility is overwhelming our civility. We cannot allow this. That act of incivility was in direct response to the president's incivility. Mr. President, you, sir, you were wrong when you pointed to the members of Congress and called them lunatics. Democrats, I might add, called them lunatics. The president hasn't been sanctioned. President hasn't been reprimanded. No censure of the president. The president is above the law. Supreme Court has said as much. He can do things that no other can do. Above the law as it relates to certain things, but not as it relates to all things. Not all. He is still subject to the norms of society. The decorum that you expect from me, you have to respect and expect from the president. Why would we allow him to use his incivility and expect me to continue to engage in civility as it relates to his incivility? Mr. President, there are some of us who are going to stand against your incivility. We have reached a point in our history where we have to hearken back to that which got us to this point in our history. I remember the 60s. I remember Dr. King. I remember the movement. I remember what it took to get me in this house. I'm not here because I'm so smart. I'm not here because of brilliance or good looks. I'm here because people made great sacrifices. And it was incivility. It was disruption. But they were prepared to suffer the consequences. We're going to have to resort to the same tactics that we used in the 60s. But we did it for a worthy and noble cause. Calling the people of Congress lunatics was not noble, Mr. President. It was an ignoble act of incivility. But I remember how we marched and how we protested. And I'm prepared to do it again. If you treat me like you treated me in the 60s, I'm going to respond the way I responded in the 60s. It is time for us to use the same level of incivility that was used in the 60s for a noble cause, to save Medicaid, to protect Medicare, to prevent the demise of Social Security. It is time for us to take that stand. Incivility emanating from the highest office in the land cannot be tolerated and has to be negated. I did it, and I have said to people, while I respect others, and while I absolutely was cooperative when they let me away, friends.
My husband is the highest paid auto.
Amount of influence. Inordinate, unusual, incomprehensible amount of influence. So the courts have given him a certain amount of immunity. His party has given him carte blanche to say anything, to come before the joint session of Congress and use the word lunatics as he refers to Democrats. The only thing left in ordinary times would be the courts. The court. Court orders are to be obeyed. I don't always like them, but I remember what John Lewis explained to me about peaceful protest. Protest, the court orders you to do certain things. You don't have to agree with it, but you do it. You'll be willing to suffer the consequences. Well, the courts are right now in the midst of, as best as they can, trying to give us the laws necessary to prevent certain things from happening. Mass layoffs have to be taken to court. Mass layoffs, no due process, no thought of what's happening in the lives of these people that you just take a pen and with the stroke of a pen, you're off. No concern about children in school. No concern about loved ones who may be ill that they're taking care of, being the chief breadwinner for the family. No concern. You've got billions, Mr. Musk. Why should you care about the concerns of people who have much less, who are working every day to eke out a living? You have billions. You shouldn't worry about them. Worry about making more money. Go to the moon. Well, they don't have that luxury. I'm going to stand for them. Mass layoffs without any consideration. I just believe that this level of behavior, if conducted, committed, engaged in by one Barack Hussein Obama, when he was president, if he behaved in this fashion, he would have been impeached. He would have been impeached. I will go to my grave with this belief.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't allow these mass layoffs. We wouldn't allow these cuts to veterans, and
we
wouldn't allow Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security to be on the chopping block. He would have been impeached. And to be very honest, I would have voted for the impeachment. Because I don't think that we should allow a president to circumvent what we know to be the requirements associated with the legislative process and with due process, which should be accorded people who are being fired, as it were. So you do these things. The courts are acting, and the courts should act. But there is a point in time, Mr. President, if your incivility allows you to disobey court orders, given that your party has given you carte blanche, given that you believe you have absolute immunity by virtue of what the Supreme Court has accorded you, and you don't have absolute, but I think you believe it.
There is now a way to ride the coattails of some of the most successful investors in the world.
That line. When you cross that line and you, Mr. President, decide you will no longer honor orders from the judiciary, when you decide that Marbury versus Madison means nothing, when you decide that you are the supreme law of the land, on that day, we will have a dictatorship. And we are close because you are continually inching right up to the line and you're looking over to the other side. And at some point, regrettably, you may cross over. Mr. President, I beg that you not do so. I beg that you would not do so, that you would honor the third branch of government designed to settle disputes among us. Not always in a favorable way to some, obviously, but that's what it's there for. So I beg, Mr. President, that you would not dishonor the judiciary in this